Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us. My name is Faza Abid, and I'm the Program Officer at the Center for Excellence in Journalism at IBA. The CEJ was established through a grant by the US State Department, and this was established through a collaboration between IBA, ICFJ, and the Mayday School of Journalism at Northwestern University. We basically do trainings for journalists at our center, and we also have a master's program in journalism. Today, we're here to discuss the media's coverage of the PK-8303 crash. We have with us Mona Khan, who will be moderating this session. Mona is a lecturer at CEJ. She has worked in print and online journalism since 1995 in Pakistan, Vietnam, and the UAE. She graduated with a bachelor's in politics from the School of Oriental and African Studies in 1994 and earned a master's in journalism from Mayday School of Journalism at Northwestern University. Our panelists for today are Ms. Mahim Meher. She is the editor of Samara TV's digital properties. She joined a digital newsroom after 18 years in print. This has given her the great opportunity to closely examine the way journalism works across three sets of media: TV, print, and online. We also have with us Mr. Adnan Rahmat, who has a journalism and media rights advocacy background spanning 30 years. His research and analysis work focuses on media professionalism issues. He writes for several national and international publications and advises various media development organizations. Over to you, Mona, now.
Thanks, Fiza. I know that Adnan might be having some connectivity issues, and here's hoping that he makes it back. Hi, everyone. I'm going to dive right into it. When the plane crash happened, we were getting, of course, all the information about the plane crash, but subsequently we were hearing, especially on social media, a lot of complaints about how the media was covering it. There was a lot of anger directed at reporters, at TV channels for the way it was covered, and there was, of course, a lot of fake news going on as well. So I'm going to start the conversation with Mahim, who decided not to run the flight manifest when the channels were running it. I wanted you, Mahim, to help walk us through why you made the decision you did and if you would do things differently.
So we have a WhatsApp group we're all working remotely and we're a big team. And when the manifest surfaced on social media, the first thing we have to always ask ourselves is, are we going to publish this? And my team, the natural instinct is that the names of the passengers are available to us. It was so early that I said, okay, the families would not have been informed about the deaths. It was not even clear. We were even hearing that there were survivors. So my first instinct was to just absolutely say, hold it, just absolutely hold it. And my team, some people, they want to go with it because when it comes to the competition in online traffic, if we put up a story within the first 10 minutes, Google sort of search, it sort of tops it. So we also had other websites running the manifest. But because this was such a big event, such a big incident, and recently I've been made acutely aware of the public shaming that comes from Twitter, where people are just skewering the media over making the wrong decisions. I was like, no, this is a time where I have to say no. So I fought the team. We were a little divided, and I said, we're not running it. We were probably the only people who actually didn't run it. Everybody else ran it. The local big names ran it. Even our television screen ran it briefly until it was shut down at those higher levels. So later on, a day or two later, it was proven that we had made a sane decision. But this kind of, I learned this actually, funnily enough, from Aaron Sorkin's The Newsroom, the show, where they had an episode in which a sort of an elected representative had been shot. And there was a line from that TV series where they said, only a doctor can declare a death. So we couldn't declare deaths. And we were so remotely we were operating so remotely that I was like, you just don't know if people are alive or dead. So that's why I held off.
Adnan, are you on? Because I wanted to bring the case of Zahra Abid on. This was a model, and a couple of news websites ran the news that she was presumed dead. And I wanted you to weigh in on that and what that means for journalism using words like presumed dead. I'm not sure if you can hear me. Are you on? I know we're having some tech issues. Hi, can you hear me, Adnan? I'm guessing he can't. So, Mahim, we talked a little bit about this when we had spoken earlier, and we brought up Zahra Abid as an example because it had surfaced in several online publications that she was presumed dead.
Yeah, so my team, my life and style desk at Samara Digital, they said, oh, there's this model and everyone's tweeting about this model. And I looked at the manifest because I was like, will I recognize any names? And this is a case of me not really knowing local celebrities that worked out. I looked at it and I said, Zahra Abid is a very common name. How do you know this model? So my ignorance, I was questioning out of ignorance. And they had to stop and be like, no, it's her, because someone tweeted that this is my sister and she's died. But I was like, I looked at that Twitter handle, it was like anonymous girl at anonymous girl. I was like, that's not really fact checked. It hasn't made the fact check. So I told the life and style desk, even though everybody was tweeting it, I said, no, we're not going to do it.
I'm sorry, I'm just checking to see if Adnan is still around, because we had spoken earlier about running stories, that what is the value of running a story? Hi, Adnan, I'm going to try again. What does this say about journalism if you're running a story that says someone is presumed dead?
Yes.
Why not wait?
Indeed, that's a good question. I think we have to look at this whole issue through a professionalism framework. Media is supposed to.
Oh,
yeah, he's got it.
Oh, bummer. Hopefully he'll come back to us because he had some really valuable insight. He and I had, the three of us had spoken before this Zoom session to just get some. And I know that he really, the answer to this really speaks on the professionalism of journalism itself, but also the absence of fact checkers in newsrooms. Newsrooms are cutting down on a lot of positions and there are no fact checkers. So tragedy. I'm going to move on. I wanted to talk a little bit about the other thing that we saw happening largely on TV screens, which was this rush to analyze and talk about what had happened. So yesterday, we got some insight that PIA was told by the aviation authorities that this is what they thought went wrong with the pilot didn't respond to air traffic control. This is yesterday on June 3rd, there was a report. But on May 22nd, when the crash happened, moments later, A, everybody was an expert on aviation, and B, was weighing in on what was going on and what happened and the blame and whatnot. Why the rush? What is the rush and where does it come from? And how much harm does it do? How much good does it do? Because this brings us back to the public's right to know.
Well, I understand that we want to know what happened, but what I'm frankly amazed at was that in such a complicated accident, or whatever you want to call it, incident, where so much big machinery is involved, it's so technical. How can you speculate as to what happened when these things have to be sort of conclusions that experts draw? So they do get the people who who are in aviation to kind of comment, and they bring them on. I did notice, though, that for some of the people who came on air, they were very careful in their words. They said, look, this is what happens theoretically, and we don't want to speculate. So I did see that kind of nuance actually also happen on television. I had told my team to try their best not to run speculation. I think TV needs to fill in time, the time slots. It has to maintain coverage. And it really is about getting people to comment on the situation. But instead of getting those experts, maybe you could have focused more on the people who were affected. For example, the identification of the dead and what people were going through, which surfaced in the second wave of reporting as well. I don't know, I can't check someone's credentials as an aviation expert. The problem is in the newsroom, not all of our reporters, we don't have reporters who've necessarily been dedicated to the aviation beat and know who the good experts are. So when I don't have a reporter who's been doing this regularly, I'm very reluctant to speak to random people. But I know that people have, they did that kind of stuff. They did that kind of coverage. But then there was backlash as well. People were like, you can't blame the pilot. The pilot is dead. And we saw the same thing happen with the Air Blue thing, that when the pilot has died and he can't defend himself and you don't know what happened, what's the point in doing a post-mortem so quickly?
So Adnan, I really did want you to talk about the Zara Abid and the use of the word presumed dead. So we're going to go back to that, and then I'll return to what we were talking about before you joined.
Sure. I'm sorry about the internet connection. I'm having a bit of a problem, but we'll continue.
Yes.
Yes, presumed dead. Indeed, I think what's happening here is the media is giving into pressure that's engendered through these over-competitive market. And what's happening is the speed of social media, we're getting information from there as well. So there's this parallel pressure that puts different kinds of pressure on not just the individual journalist who's reporting, but also the newsroom, which has to sort of compete with the moment. And what happens is, it's all overpacked. You run with every little bit of information you get, verified or not. And then the bottom line is that, you're compromising on basic journalism principles. However, an individual can be sort of, given a little bit of slack in terms of, giving into that pressure. But I think.
Oh, what a shame. Okay, so I don't have a question. I just wanted to tell you that I reached out to a few reporters who covered this. I'm sorry, I'm just going to give him a second to see. We've all been there, folks. We've all been there. We've all been there with internet connections. Hi, Adnan. You were talking about the rush to get information out and with no time to verify it. This is what we saw with Zara Abid, for example.
Yes, I think a plane crash, of course, is unfortunate. But what is even further unfortunate is, the proclivity of media houses to just continue with whatever information and package it as journalism. And that is something that should not happen.
So I reached out to a few reporters to talk to them about some of the complaints that had surfaced. One of which, so I said, what happens? So here's what they were saying. They were saying, so they go out and they get footage, and it's now become, they said, inbuilt in them to report from as close to the scene as possible. They said, ab ye ho gaya hai hamare andar कि हम accident हो, corona हो, कुछ भी हो, जब तक सबसे करीब अंदर नहीं घुस के वहां से report नहीं करेंगे, हमारी reporting अच्छी नहीं होगी. So then, which brings the question, कि ठीक है, maybe you got images that are objectionable, but those images go into the newsroom where there is a producer, there are editors. Then I went to the next step and I spoke to producers and they said, yeah, NLE editor jo hai, they put the whole thing together. Now the NLE person is a technical person and does not have any editorial training. So they are making these stories based on what the producer is saying. The producer said, well, I have to do this and this is what is required of me. So then I took it to the next level and I went to a news manager and I said, okay, here's what the reporter said. Here's what the producer said, which is that I'm getting feeds from everywhere. I'm not just getting it from one reporter in a breaking news story. I'm getting it from everywhere. I have to make fast decisions because mere upar pressure hai ki I have to get the story first. And I asked the news manager, what's your role? They said, no, we're not telling them to do anything. We're not telling them what they can and they can't do. So it's unending. Nobody is going to come. And I said, I'm not going to name your, I'm not going to name you. I'm not going to name the organization. I just help me understand this. Then came the answer, and I'm speaking about two folks who said to me, this is what the audience wants. Then I asked, of course, how do you base it? Like, where are you getting the information? Because you're saying this is what the audience wants, but what about the other side where I can also say people on social media or people are writing in letters are saying this is crass, this is crude, this is unacceptable, this is unethical. What about those voices? Where does the buck stop? No one's taking account, no one is taking responsibility.
Well, so this is the interesting part with digital, that if you are a digital newsroom like I am with Sama Digital connected to Sama TV. So whatever happens in Sama TV newsroom, like you said right now, how there's a lot of pressure. The interesting thing is if you are a website attached to a television channel, I'm not talking about like Dawn, where you are a newspaper and the newspaper has a website, right? I'm talking about Sama TV that just has a television channel and you are their website. Not even like Jung or the News or Geo, which has newspaper reporters. So usme, like, absolutely what happens is that the television will run whatever it wants to run, however it decides to run it. The problem is on digital, we are getting our brand, it gets the feedback from the viewer, the audience. This is the audience that is only on social media, but there are a lot of people on social media. So on Facebook, on our YouTube live stream chat, on Twitter, people will respond. And we don't even need to just see what they're saying about our content. We can see what people are saying about the rest of TV channels. The problem with television is that television thinks that it ran on TV, so it doesn't matter whatever it looked like. We don't need to worry about it because chal gaya, phir khatam ho gaya. Problem is that people now, they will take their phones, they'll record their television sets. They will take a picture of a ticker. And then they'll put it on the internet. They'll put it on social media. They'll put it on WhatsApp groups. And they will say, we don't like this. We think this is crass. Right. We don't think that. So television's material is being put on the internet. And that's where they give their feedback. Now, if you don't care about that feedback, that's another thing. But at digital, what happens is that my Twitter feed, I have people DMing me. I have people tagging me. I have people abusing me. And abusing other channels and saying, this is rubbish. That goes hand in hand with audience members who do want to see the gory details, by the way. Our YouTube statistics show us that people do want to see, the live coverage of unfiltered disaster. And the stories that get the most hits are also the ones which could possibly have very raw, sort of uncensored material. So there is an appetite for gore, but then there are people who say they don't like it. As an editor, when you talk about the responsibility, I can't take responsibility for what Sama TV does, but I can take responsibility for what Sama TV stuff we put onto digital officially. And I just bleach out things that I know are going to get us, you know, a bad rep. So that's what I do. But it is very difficult because not everyone agrees with me. Sometimes my team members say, "Who are you to censor?" The good thing is that my bosses, they have given me a lot of editorial independence. So they never say anything to me. And the TV people also understand, and they've also said to me that, you know, Mahim, if you feel something is not appropriate for digital, don't put it on. But that means that have to be news managers in digital, that even if television makes a bad decision in the rush and the pressure, digital is the second gatekeeper where you can put a block on something like a manifest or a dead body showing up in live footage or something on social media that is gory. You can not run it. It's okay. And the funny thing is that our traffic was fantastic that day. People wanted information and they were coming to the website, they were coming to the YouTube live stream, they were on Facebook. So our numbers were phenomenal. So I said, look, I don't need to profit anymore. I'm very happy. We're getting good traffic, so I can exercise editorial caution. And what I think is in the end, then I tweeted about it extensively. I said, this is how we covered the plane crash. And I gave a little bit of transparency in how we were covering it. And people responded well. So you also, in the long run, if you make these decisions to hold back or be sensible, it's good for your brand. So it's a win-win situation for me if I exercise what I deem to be good editorial decision-making protocols.
Hi, Adnan. Can you hear me? Right. So I wanted to tell you about a reporter that I spoke to who said to me, it's very easy to bash reporters. And he said that it is, we rarely hear the stories of reporters getting beaten up at the scene of an event. In this case, he was quoting family members or people getting to the airport. He said also that when journalists were trying to get into the airport after the crash, they weren't allowed. And somehow he made it there and he was able to get some important information out in his story. He says that journalists have to often do things and risk their own lives to get information that they believe is the public's right to know. And when they are bashed for things that they are doing, it is very disheartening, but it is also encouraging in some way regulators to step in. And it's also, she believes, encouraging regulators to use that information to curb, to put into place systems perhaps that would disallow reporters from doing the job that she believes they should be doing. What do you think of that?
That's a tightrope walk. You know, the profession or, you know, the assignment at hand demands information, and probably urgently if you're talking about an unfolding event, and also information that may be substantial. So if you're going to be talking to people who are either affected there, then there's going to be a pushback. And so the reporter at that moment also carries on her or his shoulders representation of the sector itself. And it's going to be difficult if you are insensitive. There are always ways of getting information, even in difficult circumstances. And I think that kind of skill set and that kind of information chain in terms of, you know, getting information that can be processed into something that can be put out to a larger audience, that has to be worked out in advance. And that kind of skill set or process or policy, let's say, is not often very clear, or you know, if it is at times, then maybe, you know, the whole newsroom or the news team may have to make compromises. And that's going to affect both the journalist's ability to get information and also her or his safety.
So Adnan, when we lost you, I asked Mahim this, and I was hoping you could weigh in on it as well. When the crash happened, there seemed to be a huge rush to get the experts in and get them to start analyzing what went wrong. This is before the manifest was at various places of publication. We didn't know a lot of information, yet it seemed that everybody, we all become experts in various fields very quickly. But why do you think there's a rush to analyze before the reporting is done, or even as the reporting is happening?
Let's just take a little step backwards and look at the bigger picture here. I think we've got a market that is saturated with television channels. In countries such as, let's say, the UK, France, the US, of course, they've got more channels than us, but most of them are local information channels. And we have this disposition towards, quickly informing the entire country about events. And so that means a rush to either get experts, or I'll just say so-called experts. And if you can't get them, to just, position yourself as one. And that's going to disrupt the fundamental task at hand, which is to, bring clarity. And maybe, I think, because an air crash, of course, is an extreme example of an unfolding event. And so we don't have to know everything. It's unfortunate that the media thinks they have to get maximum information in the least amount of time. How can we know what happened when the aviation experts haven't themselves gotten a grasp of what has happened? So why explain that? And why do we need to know who was on that plane in individual terms? So yes, it's a plane, there will be an X number of people traveling. Some of them may be celebrities, but we don't have to go beyond that. And until we get information from people who have it and who are supposed to verify it, only then can we should be able to share. But this proclivity of standing in as experts and to provide information when it isn't available, it distorts this whole assignment of bringing information that helps people understand what is going on, rather than overpacking the moment, I think, which affects journalism seriously.
So this question is to both of you. What are the challenges of choosing what to cover and when? The reason I ask this is because you would have seen that families of those folks who were affected by the plane crash took to social media and started issuing statements or were recording video messages. What does that say about the media itself that did they not approach the families later on? Did they drop the story? Is it only a breaking news story? We don't do follow-ups. What do you think of that?
Shall I go first?
Yes, we have you here. So.
Okay, yes. Again, I think context, for those of us who practice journalism, we know the basics. You have to verify your information, and you have to seek permission if you're handing out personal information. And of course, you also have to give a broader picture, putting the text in context. But I think what we are missing here is the fundamental principle, which is the do no harm principle. I mean, it is putting simply oneself in the place where something has happened. Would we want to find out if one of our family members were traveling in that plane from the TV screen what had happened, or the names of the passengers, even if you've gotten a hold of the manifest? For instance, later on we found out one of the air hostesses who was supposed to be on that plane was pulled out at the last moment and replaced with another one. And so if, her family members in Karachi or wherever they were, they didn't know that, what were they going to assume? Because she had left for the airport. And so this do no harm principle is really important in ensuring that you're only handing out information that is available and that has been verified. The analysis can come later. We're mixing analysis with reporting or immediate information, and that distorts everything.
Mahim, what about you? What are some of the challenges you face in choosing what to cover and looking at user-generated info as well as a source?
It's interesting about when people started making their own videos. So I think that with the number of reporters we had, they were doing their best at Sama. My team members, they thought about reaching out to some people, but they sort of realized that they didn't want to cause any more trauma. So we didn't do a lot of stories. One of them was a colleague of ours, Zainab Imam. Her brother was the Bank of Punjab person who survived. And, I knew her, she had tweeted about it. And we had this argument that if she's tweeted about it, then she must be willing to talk about it. We didn't end up doing that story, frankly. And we had access to a very close source, a good friend whose brother survived the crash. Big story. We didn't do that. When people started making videos, for me, that is kind of a good thing. User-generated content is a good thing. It means to me that this person who is an aggrieved, bereaved person in this plane crash, वो बात करने के लिए भी तैयार है और वो पब्लिक के साथ बात करने के लिए तैयार है. और the best thing about social media is that all of the journalists, they're on Twitter. All the TV channels, they monitor Twitter. I think that if there's a victim, a person whose family members have died and they're having difficulty and they use Twitter, they control the message a lot better. They tell how much they want to tell. And it's very sort of a nice way, rather than having reporters shove a mic in your face and ask stupid questions. So they control the medium, they control the message. Then, because consent is inbuilt with your Twitter video or your Facebook video, you are indicating that you are giving information publicly. Then we can contact you and do a more in-depth interview with you, which is what Sama TV did. So our CEO, members of his family, they also suffered in the plane crash. And one of them came on the Nadeem Malik live show to talk about the difficulties in identifying the dead and the experience they were having with PIA. And that person had made a Twitter video. So I think it's a good thing to have user-generated content because it gives journalists a very good signal कि इन लोगों से बात की जा सकती है. Maybe more, there are lots of victims, there are lots of families. So yeah, you're right. A lot of reporters could have gone and spoken to them. When they go speak to them, how soon they go speak to them, that's another question. So the wise thing to do would be, if people are going public, you can approach them first, but then you have to go through those family names and maybe later on have a plan to kind of do special coverage of who were these people who died and who were these families who've been affected. And you can do it later on. So that's what I think is something that I learned in this incident.
Do you think it's possible to create some kind of a framework when it comes to natural disasters, accidents like these, some kind of framework of this is what we're going to report because this is the public's right to know? Is there something that is the public's right to know? Because, when I reached out to reporters, they said that everything is the public's right to know. And they told me that I needed to say that, to be clear, that I'm not at all encouraging censorship. So I'm putting it out there, friends. I'm not encouraging censorship. Adnan, what does the public have? How many rights what are their rights when it comes to information and knowledge and about these events?
Yes, absolutely. They have a fundamental right to know about what's happening around them. They travel in planes, so if a plane has fallen out of the sky, they want to know what has happened. But I think we don't have to give them absolutely everything. We have to, if we are journalists, then we have to filter. Journalism is the process of filtering information and offering up, number one, verified information, and number two, contextualizing it with analysis and reference to experts And so you get both the bigger picture as well as the finer, smaller detail, so that you're able to make sense of what has happened. So it's what I would call news you can use. If there would ever be a guide, in terms of what kind of information you have to give out, and so that's what they might, of course, also have the right to gossip and the right to rumor. We could insist, but then that's fine. But if we are dealing with the journalism world, then we have to process information and only give out information that is verified and that is not rumor. If you want to give information, if you don't have verified information, then you have to explain. You have to qualify that information, so that right to know doesn't mean right to misinform, right to be misinformed. There's no such right. It is right to be informed. So that's where we are.
What about you, Mahim? What do you think?
This is something I struggle with. So if I'm sitting in a newsroom and I have to make decisions as to what I think is useful to the principle of journalism, that what is useful information to people, it places a big burden on me. This is where class factors in, my sensibilities factor in. I come from a privileged background. I have a certain sensibility of what is useful information to me. And I sit and decide what is useful information to everybody else. It is very difficult, and I struggle with this every time, which is why we have a lot of newsroom discussions. Should we ye chalani chahiye, nahi chalani chahiye, ye English mein chalani chahiye, Urdu mein chalani chahiye, video mein chalani chahiye, isko agar chalayenge to headline kaise banayenge? So that is one of the things that I kind of struggle with. But just like Adnan said, this is what supersedes that kind of dilemma, is the do no harm principle. And what I think in this incident with the plane crash, the biggest thing was that people are really in a lot of pain. And we felt, journalists covering it, it's not easy. You feel a lot of pain. It's very difficult to cover pain. And so we don't want to cause more pain. We don't want to, and I remember saying this to my team. I said, listen, the people who need to know the names on the manifest are first the families. The next day, when Jinnah Hospital started to officially say that they had handed over bodies or they had identified people, that gave us an indication, yab families ko pata chal gaya hai. So then our risk of doing harm by just informing somebody randomly on a website or TV goes down, because the authorities, the doctors have informed them, and they've been informed in the right way, not learning about it on Twitter. So we're not taking part in that circus. Then someone alerted us that, by the way, the authorities are not able to get through to बहुत सारे families. उनसे राब्ता नहीं हो पा रहा है. So मैंने कहा भाई नाम नहीं चलाओ, भाई लोगों को पता ही नहीं है कि their people are on the plane. Because this happened with a couple of friends, that there was a tragedy in their family, and some reporters tweeted the body, and a relative, the victim's son was in Canada, and people started to tell him that yaar tumhara your father, he's been shot dead. And the family had not been in touch with him yet. And with Corona, there were so many families who could not fly in to the funeral, to be there, to identify the dead. There's families that were scattered. So the do no harm principle superseded the right to know. And then I said, why does the public need to know an entire list of people? All it needs to know is that there were 99 people who have died, and it's really tragic. So we can slow down the way we put that information out there. And right to know, so then we focused our right to know journalism onto examining, our business reporter Farooq Baloch, he did an examination of PIA's finances. We looked at how many times the PIA flights had been grounded internationally because of technical difficulties. So then we kind of try to focus on other things rather than the immediacy of the trauma, because the risk is so high of you getting it wrong.
So we've got a couple of questions coming in, but I had two more questions that I wanted to ask. Adnan, I'll start with you.
Sure.
Where is the regulator And do we need a regulation? And the reason I ask this is, we talked a little bit about it before, that if you look at the Airbu clash of 2010, which is now 10 years ago, and then there was the Bhoja Air incident, which is, I think, the largest casualties, 127, and that was 2012.
Right.
Have we seen, like, can we say that there's, oh, here's some lessons learned in our coverage from the last two incidents? And if there is no lesson learned, does this mean we need a regulation? And if someone's going to regulate, who's that going to be?
Well, there's always going to be a need for regulation, but what kind of regulation? Because information saves lives, it can misinform, it can inform, it can disinform. So the best regulation, of course, is always self-regulation. That's like a universal media sort of tenet. However, in our context, we don't have very many examples of good self-regulation where you put yourself up for accountability and you are ready to acknowledge mistakes you've made. But I think, there's a media sector and all of the entire sector is doing journalism. However, what kind of journalism? So there's, let's say, The Guardian versus Daily Mail. Both of them do journalism.
Okay.
Both will be covering the same event, let's say. Or in our local context, let's say Khabre and let's say Dawn. So they're going to be different in their approaches. So there's much more self-regulation, I think, among publications or media entities that are more professional. But at a larger level where, you can address complaints or entertain, complaints is in the UK, for example, there's this, the press commission where before the regulator Ofcom comes in, there's this representative association of the entire media there that entertains complaints. And if those complaints are not addressed and do not satisfy the complainant, then it goes to the regulator. In our case, we don't have that. We have what's the Council of Pakistan Newspaper Editors, but they're also owners, most of them. And so, it is also print, a very small portion of our media landscape. In electronic media, there's none at the self-regulation level, industry representation level. So that leaves the official regulator, which historically has proved to be a coercive implementer of official priorities rather than an enforcer of journalism standards or industry standards, let's say. No one should be dictating what kind of journalism can be done, certainly in terms of official regulators. But I think we need to work on a mechanism whereby we have our own mechanism of putting in requests for grievances and addressing them very quickly. Some of our publications, for example, have what they call the people's editor, a localized accountability mechanism where the person is independent and will take complaints and address them. But official regulation is a no-no. I think that may be a cure that's worse than the disease.
So I do want us to just pause for a moment and just introspect on the time we're in right now, which is that a lot of journalists are working from home. A lot of them are not receiving the same salaries they were receiving because now they're finding out कि वो allowances नहीं है, transport allowance नहीं है, फला allowance नहीं है. Some journalists have been kicked out. The financial uncertainty is very, very high. So इसमें, is it possible to have journalists self-regulate, not cross lines because they're so anxious about keeping their jobs, and if it means they have to do things for this invisible audience, what do? How do they manage?
I think that's no justification to make compromises. You have to choose, even at the individual level. I understand there are all these various challenges that are happening. Okay, you don't do investigative journalism because it's both a labor and cost-intensive undertaking. You have to go out, meet people, dig out information and so on and so forth. But it's a really well-connected world in which we operate, and you can do a lot of that sitting from home. And ultimately, you have to decide if you want to be a professional journalist or not. And if your organization doesn't put a premium on itself being a professional entity, then it does not free you of the responsibility of being a professional and making every effort necessary to file in good reports that can hold up in terms of veracity.
Mahim, this is, I know you're not in TV, but I have a question from a friend of mine, Binny, last night. She wanted to know, why do we use graphics and animated graphics on TV screens where when there is a plane crash, inevitably we have a image of a plane flying in? I did ask in newsrooms, and they said कि एक ज़माने में there were a lot of reenactments that the newsrooms were doing using actors, clearly stated a reenactment. And then that practice was disowned. So newsrooms say there is this innate desire to sort of give the audience an idea of this is what happened, hence the graphics, sellable graphics. And then there's also music, inevitably very sad music. Why do you think this is done?
Let me ask you, what's wrong with it?
Oh, I think it's crass. I think it can be insensitive. I think the images are enough to know that a plane crash took place. And I'm not sure if an image of a plane flying, an animated plane with, I'm sad about the plane crash. Do I need to be extra? Adnan, what do you think?
I would agree with you. I think it's an appeal to a baser instinct, this fascination with horror and morbidity. It is not the job of journalism to do that. Have you ever seen BBC do that or CNN? But of course, there are other media entities that do it. And so which one do you think is better? And it's also an issue. It's an imperative of electronic media, this real-time media. And yes, it's understandable. They want visuals to such a stunning story of a plane falling out of the sky. But, those visuals don't have to be about this plane, diving and boom, flames going up. That's just terrible.
Mahim?
I think it's akin to actually going into a hospital room and showing blood and gore. Would we do that?
We do.
The whole discussion here is, should we do that or not?
Right.
So when I talked about when I decide things in the digital newsroom and the privilege, for you, I mean, and I don't like the diving plane on fire. I don't like it. So Samara TV is one of the channels that started the crime scene reenactment genre about over 10 years ago. So I'm not sure how it's connected to the crime scene reenactment genre is with actors and things. It didn't involve the augmented reality, the virtual reality sort of studio things. That came in later. And Samara does pride itself on having a fantastic AR VR team, which really came in handy during the elections and all the graphics. Yes, they do have a flaming plane that comes out of the sky. I do not agree with it. Anyone who knows me as an editor knows that I like subtlety and restraint and, no hysterics. However, I think that if the TV channel has this capability, what we're looking at is that you have in-house artists and this obviousness this is why I asked you the question. And I understand why you find it distressing to look at wo jahaz gir raha hai and all that. But I would wager that I do not want to judge that it is deemed crass by other people in Pakistani audiences. I'm not so sure. it's just simply a plane that crashed, and it wasn't, well, this one was technically perhaps not on fire. So there's a factual inaccuracy in that graphic. But the more I work with television, the less I find that I should be judging it on the aesthetic principles and preferences that I have because of my training or the kind of journalism I think I should be doing. I maintain and I continue to do the journalism I want to do, but I also know that TV audiences, they're not complaining about that plane. We don't get complaints about that, and I get a lot of feedback. So it doesn't seem to be bothering our core audience. So I think for me, the jury is still out on it. They have the capability and they do that VR. And I used to be very judgmental of it 2 years ago when I joined some. I was like, ye kya cheez hai? But I've realized that I'm not so sure I should judge it by my own yardstick anymore. So TV does a lot of stuff, and everyone does.
So Adnan, is this where you spoke earlier about a people's regulator, and Kamal had a question on that? That is this a situation where a regulatory body could help make a decision? And I'm not speaking official from the government, but I'm saying like a people's editor. Is this something where we could exercise a variety of views and then come up with one that everybody can apply across the board?
First of all, Pakistan Electronic Media Regulatory Authority, PEMRA, does have a complaint mechanism system.
Yes.
They've got, in fact, local provincial chapters, so you can go in and, file a complaint. But that's one thing. I think at the end of the day, we have to ask ourselves a question. After all, would we choose a doctor if we need medical attention just at random, or would we be putting some thought into what kind of a doctor we need? Because we don't want to, find ourselves at the end of Murphy's Law, So media and media practitioners are guardians of public interest. And so what is public interest? So should we aspire to higher ideals and values of journalism? Or should we give, what we think people want? Who has made that decision about what people want? And, do no harm principle, attending to public interest in our journalism, nobody talks about that in the newsrooms. I understand it's a manifestation of the over-competitive market that we have, and this pressure between, let's say print journalism and real-time electronic media journalism. The imperatives and compulsions are different. And we are just taking the easy way out. We're not looking at the need for professional journalism. We think if there's no demand for it, it shouldn't be supplied. I think that's the wrong way to look at it. Any and all professions should aspire to be as professional as they can be. And I think it applies to journalism all the more so.
Okay, so I'm going to head over to some questions. And the first one, there are actually two that are related. So Ali's asking us, when PIA would release an audio communication between the ATC and pilots, the speculations would start automatically. Why didn't the government wait before releasing this? Media needs to fill in the time capsules with something. What should it be? And to follow up, Sana Batul asked, how ethical is it to run an audio of a pilot on TV while his family watches over and over and waits in uncertainty whether he is alive or not? Adnan?
Okay. Number one, I think, a plane has crashed, and so there's a regulatory authority for it. The aviation sector, the Civil Aviation Authority is the authority relevant in this case. And if so, they're releasing something, then we should go with it. And then, wait for that story to unfold still further. PIA is another stakeholder here. Their plane, went down. And of course, it was being flown by a pilot. And if they've chosen to make it public, then it's in the public domain and can be reported. Of course, I think the release of the pilot's audio didn't come, I think, until 2 days later, from 2 or 3 days later, from official sources. I think there was an unofficial source. It was already being done. Probably, somebody leaked it from the ATC. One, if it came from unofficial sources, then we have to verify whether it's official, it's that pilot and it's that flight and all of that or not. And if it's been officially, then we can start analyzing as to what has really happened, roping in, I think, relevant experts. We are not either medical experts or aviation experts or any other experts. All we have to do is put information together and applying journalism filters.
Mahim, what do you think?
I think I remember saying that we wouldn't run the Mayday Call, and I think it ran on TV, and I don't think we ran it. I think by mistake, maybe even someone put it up and I had it taken down. I agree with Sana that it is very distressing for the family. That wasn't necessarily my primary concern. Obviously, one does think about the family, but I was like, well, it's salacious. It's people don't need to hear a Mayday call. It's very triggering for people, even though I heard that it was very calm. I didn't hear it myself, actually. So I'm like, well, I don't want to titillate people. I'm not in the business of doing that as far as I can try. So मैंने तो मना कर दिया था. थोड़ा सा TV पे शायद चला भी था. But I feel it's too close to a moment of death. Why would I want to run something that is like that? But then we see with the Black Lives Matter, we've also seen moments close to death with recordings, audio recordings of people saying things. Then it's okay for you. Then it's something that is used.
Yes, good point.
Used to, matlab ek baat hai ki this man has been killed by a police officer. Then it is used as evidence that an injustice was perpetrated by a person in power. That is public's right to know. That applies very nicely there. But the audio clip here with the Mayday, I'm like, well, what is anyone going to use that as information? I mean, okay, the contents of it. I'd much rather have, if PIA issues it officially, it adds commentary to it. That listen, this is the audio, and we get to ask questions that what does this audio mean? And PIA officially says that, well, for the initial findings, it appears that the pilot is saying this, and we do journalism that way, that we put the audio in some kind of context. Otherwise, without any filter, without any surrounding story, it's just titillation to listen to that kind of thing. That's what I would feel. But that said, maine rok ke rakha, I didn't run it.
Laiba is asking, she's got two questions, but the first one is a little bit more apt, Mahim, on what she's saying, with due respect, how many editors are as empowered as you?
That's very nice. It's a very difficult job. I'm empowered, if so, because I have a great CEO. I have a great boss. He's a very rational man. He has the same principles, and we are allowed to do what we want on digital. It's also that I have 18 years of print, and I was an editor on the city pages in Karachi when there were bomb blasts every day. That's when my career started at Daily Times. And we didn't have social media then. But I've also, since I joined Sama and I got attacked so much and trolled, I was crapped on so much that I've become a very scared editor. So it's not empowered, it's just I'm terrified that someone is going to turn around and say, what is this awful thing that you've done on digital? And so there are a lot of editorial things that basically pata hai, you enforce them, but they seem very amplified. I've been vocal and about being transparent about our decision making. I don't see a lot of other digital editors commenting on these things, and I wish they did, because these are important discussions. But it's been a struggle because I don't always know I'm right. So that's why I have this great team, like my news editor, Ismail Sheikh. Like, we're pulling each other's hair out. The English desk is fighting with the Urdu desk. The video desk is fighting with the NLEs. And our social media people, they're pulling their hair out because we're all just trying to figure out how do we do this ethically. And often they accuse me of being too cautious. And in fact, when I joined Sama and I put in a lot of checks and balances, our traffic graph went down. So, I mean, I wasn't always sure.
So Laiba's question is, and it's open to both of you, but Mahim, I'll start with you. Why is it important for our mainstream media channels to interview families of victims?
Well, I personally think it's rubbish reporting when they do it. I've been into stories, crime stories, where there's been a lot of pain and trauma. The way they do it is terrible. It's just crap. However, that's my sense. I do think that there's some kind of catharsis. Some families do want to talk. Some families do want, and they really are people who want to be seen, acknowledged, heard, and they say what they need to say to the camera. Sometimes it can lead to help for them. It documents their experience. So it's not always a bad thing. कि 3 दिनों तक हमारी DNA testing नहीं हुई है. Yeah, this kid was just about to go to university, or he was the breadwinner, and then the government steps in. So it documents parts of their lives if done properly. I don't think it's an easy thing talking to victims. I think it's a very fine art, and very few people do it justice. But I think that we shouldn't crap on the fact that the reporters go to do it, because I've seen good things come out of it. So that's what I would say there.
Adnan, what do you think? Is there value in talking to families of victims?
I would agree with Mahim, but add that, I think what they're trying to do here is humanize a story that is a bit, still traumatic in terms of the nature of the event. But I think we have such a terrible way of humanizing also issues. And we need to put in some distance between the event and the interview if we want to get the context right. Particularly if we're talking to direct victims or their families, because their sound bites, what they have to say, will also in somewhere, be taken into account when officially investigating the event. So it's important to not, put them in a situation where they, sort of indict themselves, I think.
Okay, so that's it from me. Is there anything else that you would like to add that you feel I did not bring up? Please let me know.
I think we've done a good job covering every aspect. There's nothing else that I can think of that hasn't been mentioned.
Okay. Did we cover all bases, Adnan? I know that we didn't get a chance to talk to you in the beginning. I hope you don't think this is cruel, but when you and I had spoken, we'd had such a great conversation on the point of Zara Abid's use of presumed dead.
I wanted to go back to that.
Yeah, and I hope you're still there, but I was really hoping you could speak about that again. And I know you've spoken about it a couple of times, but we've always been disconnected. I really wanted to look at the use of the words presumed dead.
Yes, that's such a terrible phrase if it involves your own family, isn't it? And I think therein lies the reality of what we're doing here when we're doing journalism. How can we presume someone dead until they're verified as dead? And it's not our job to verify, not our job as in to find out and see for ourselves if they're dead. We need to allow officials to take stock of the situation and then put that in perspective. But I think there are 2 points here I'd like to make. One is, so we have print media, we have electronic media as in television and radio, and we have social media. If you look at it, a plane fell out of the sky. All three had different kinds of treatment to the coverage of it. And for print, it was the least hysterical. And there's a reason for it. It's because they have had time to, like, double or triple think what they want to do, how to contextualize the issue, and which stories to, which sequence to put them in, and to make it a more wholesome account of what has happened to its readers in the morning. I understand that's not possible, obviously, on television media, but there are institutions that choose, like BBC, let's say, that choose not to be hysterical and apply the same principles. There are ways of being real time while being professional, and that's something our television media has to do introspection about. And the second thing is, there are 4 levels where we can evaluate or measure up the quality of journalism. One is at the individual level, so it's the reporter. So she or he are going to take some liberties when they go out into the field, but those liberties can be checked at the second level, which is the institutional level. So does the institution have a code of ethics in place? Do they do things in a certain way? The third is professional. I mean, we have media that is commercial. They may be the guardians of public interest, but they're also out to make money, right? And so we have to see if professional approach is adopted by some of those. And lastly, at the regulatory level, how does the industry itself regulate itself? And I think at the institutional level only is where some of this discussion has taken place, not at the industry professional level, and certainly not at the regulator level. In fact, PEMRA regulates the private broadcast sector, but does not have any representation of that sector in its board. It has only government officials, and it does not regulate the public sector. And so there's this fundamental flaw there where industry standards cannot be discussed, and hence the problem that we have 2 sets of rules for broadcast journalism. So I think the bottom line is, we need to have like a much bigger scale of discussion like the one we've just had, with all the various representative associations talking about this. It is a very serious business. The ongoing coverage of COVID-19 also is very serious business. People are being misinformed, and government says something, or individuals in the government say something, and our medical experts are saying something else, and we're downplaying our medical experts and overplaying our the others. And so who is going to contribute to this broader debate on how public interest can be upheld, and how media and journalism can be public interest journalism?
Thank you. That's a great way for us to, I'm sorry, Mahim, did you want to add something?
There's a couple of points that just occurred to me. The regulator did say that you can't show blood and gore. That's why TV logos and screens started to go black and white. This is when a lot of the terrorism reportage was happening.
Yeah.
They also said you need to put a time lag for live terrorist event coverage. So the regulator has successfully done this in Pakistan. The other thing that if anyone who's listening here today is on a digital team, what you may have realized is that your YouTube videos that are showing very disturbing footage, the videos are going to get demonetized. And Samara TV had this problem because, I'll give you a very small example. We had videos of when Karachi's Kachra politics started to happen. Strangely enough, we found that the garbage collection packages and Sindh government packages, they were being demonetized on our YouTube, which is how we earn in dollars. And much to we were very confused because we were like, it's just a heap of garbage. So when we spoke to some experts, and they said that after the Christchurch, New Zealand live shooting and Facebook live streaming incident, a coalition was formed, and anyone who cares to find will look it up. And it's the International Coalition of something. Facebook, Google, all these guys got together. And what they did is they said that we don't want this to ever happen again. So any disturbing video footage that comes, it will be uploaded into our collective server. And if it surfaces anywhere on the internet, we will block it, take it down, or demonetize it. This is called hashing. So what we discovered was, in 2017, the Seven blast happened. And there was a package, this is before my time at Samara TV, a package of body parts coming out from a kachra kundi was a TV package जो चलाई गई थी TV पे. वो मेरे website पे पड़ी हुई थी, वो मेरे YouTube पे पड़ी हुई थी. पता ये चला कि after the whole coalition business and the big media giant platforms discovered this thing, they're using AI and their algorithms to ensure that media producers, news producers in Pakistan or wherever don't upload disturbing footage. So we had to scrape our entire back end of body parts, blood, all of this. So if you're in a digital newsroom and you're attached to a TV, you have to read up on this because it's not even a matter of ethics. It's a matter of money. You will lose out if you put up unethical, gory, disturbing footage. Our Mayday video that was put up by mistake, it was demonetized. So these global giants, their policies are stricter in terms of ethical standards of reporting. So you will not be able to even put that stuff up on your website and get anywhere with it. So we may not have a Pakistani regulator, but international platforms are doing this increasingly in their community guidelines.
So Mahim, a question has just come in that's for you from Saqib Tanveer. I think we have a little bit of time, and it's interesting. So Mahim said that she is cautious and scared of the criticism that may come her way, but isn't this PR? Shouldn't journalism be about saying what others can't? When did we start thinking about what people might say? Log kya kahenge?
When I say I'm scared, and anyone who knows me in the news industry knows that I have never been scared to speak my mind. I'm almost unpopular because of it. It is not that I'm scared ki log kya kahenge. I'm scared that somebody will turn around and say to me that you did not follow the principles of journalism. You've done a bad job. And I did this recently. So Sama ka website ran these old pictures of, by mistake, of Imran Khan in Nathia Gali. And I had to we had to do a fact check. We messed up. We made a blunder. I had to apologize. We had to delete the tweets, say we had deleted the tweets, and people trolled me. They tried to hack into my accounts for days after. So it isn't that log kya kahenge. It is that I never want to be accused of not doing the highest standards of journalism. And I'm not even trained in journalism, by the way. So I'm scared of someone turning around and pointing a finger at me that, Mahim, you should have known better. This was a harmful misinformation, disinformation, bad journalism thing that you or your team did. And I'm answerable for my whole digital team and answerable publicly to what Samara TV does sometimes. So these experiences have taught me that log kya kahenge matters to me. My journalistic reputation matters to me. And I've been very vocal, like as a critic of journalism as well. So that's what it means when I say that.
Okay, thanks, folks. I think we're done, and thank you for what I thought was a very valuable conversation, but also so many more questions that I have, which means that I'm going to have to call you both back because I'm now thinking that we need to talk about regulation. Adnan, we've got to have you come back, and we must talk about regulation, looking into the laws. I love this idea of yours, of this people's editor, and I'd love to see a community of journalists come together and sit down together and say, you know what, as an organization, let's do this. Let's do this across the board. So until then, I bid you farewell, and I thank you again. And I thank everyone who took the time out to come out today. I really appreciate it. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.